All right, so here are a couple things that you need to know for the exam three. So I wrote down here a good representation of things that you should know. You can go ahead and pause the video and then you can write it down but what I'm going to be doing right now is explaining. So the first thing that you need to know is you need to figure out what all of the restrictions of the inverses are. So for example, if I have y equals arc sine, which is sine inverse, just know that the restriction is between negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. And that's basically in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 4. The restriction on arc cosine is between 0 to pi. That's in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. The restriction on arc tangent is also going to be in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 4. You don't need to know what the pictures look like. And we did the graphs in the class, but you don't need to remember or know how to graph them. Just know what the restrictions are. So some of the problems that you might see are problems like this, where you need to be able to do this by hand. So you can use your calculator if you want, but you need to show me how do we do this by hand. Okay, so this you can just write by hand. Okay, that's an ugly and. Okay, so in addition to the inverse functions, you need to be able to know how to solve the trig equations, both restricted and unrestricted. So restricted means that you can only have them between a particular interval. So for example, from 0 to 2 pi, or from 0 to 360 degrees. Now in the exam, I'm not going to give you radians or degrees. You can use whatever you want, but just make sure that if you do restricted, you only give me the ones in those in those intervals. Unrestricted, you can use is when you see the word all solutions. Remember that sine and cosine, you take the angle and you add it to 2 pi k, where k is going to be an integer. Also note that tangent and cotangent don't have a plus 2 pi k, they have a plus pi k. So that's because remember the tangent and cotangent have a period of pi. So for these trig equations, make sure that you know how to factor. Some of you guys have been using the quadratic formula, which is good, so you can use that. Also know how to solve for theta when it is not on the unit circle. So for example, if you have cosine of theta is equal to 1/4, just make sure that you know how to do that. One of them is by taking arc cosine to the other side, take the cosine inverse and figure that one out. And then after that, you need to go back to all students say calculus and try to figure out what the other one's going to be using geometry. Okay, law of sines and cosines. Make sure that you know this formula. This formula is very simple. Sine A over A equals sine B over B equals sine C over C. Also know the law of cosines formula. Okay, those are not that hard to memorize. Law of sines, you use it when you have angle, side, angle, side, angle, and side, angle. Remember that when you have this case, you can either have 1, 2, or no triangles. I wrote down right here some explanation on when to use, when to know when you have 1 or 2 or no triangles. If you have no triangle, that you're immediately going to have an error, a domain error. So then that means that you're going to have no triangle. If there's no error, then you're going to take the angle that you found, subtract it from 180, and then add it to the original angle that they give you. If it's less than 180, then 2 triangles exist. If it's more than 180, then it's only going to be 1 triangle. Also know how to do the bearing problems. Those are the ones that I really want you to focus on. We did other problems, but mainly focus on the bearing problems. Law of cosines, you use it when you have side, and side, angle, side. Remember that when you have the side, you want to always solve for the largest side first. Whereas you have side, angle, side, you always want to solve for the lowest one, or the smallest angle. Okay. And then the last thing about vectors, you remember that they can be put in component form. So this is what component form looks like, or IJ form. You can find the cosine, I'm sorry, not the cosine, the angle of between two vectors using this formula. This formula will be given to you. It'll be cosine theta equals u dot v, where u dot v is a dot product between the two vectors, divided by the magnitude of u and the magnitude of v. I wrote down here the magnitude of u is equal to the square root of a squared plus b squared, where a and b are the components of the vector. Also remember that if u dot v is equal to 0, then we say that u and v are orthogonal. Okay, so we say orthogonal. 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 Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but orthogonal. I don't think I spelled it right. Okay, so yeah, that's going to be a really good representation of what you should see on the exam and also what you should know. So there's a lot here. Just make sure that you really familiarize yourself with a lot of the concepts and know what tool to use.